Welcome, everyone. I will let everyone else who joins um, as we move along in the session. So, welcome again. This is the second collective session titled Moving in Concert. We're going to present four more of, four different artists that are joining us today and also their works, which is really exciting. To begin with, I want to remind everyone that we are recording this session so that we can have it available in YouTube and also in the collective classroom. I will begin with the land acknowledgement as usual. Arquetopia acknowledges that all of our artist residencies are located on historical lands that over the centuries have been continuously defended from the invasion of multiple empires, including the Hispanic monarchy, the First French Empire, the British Empire, and the Mexican-American War. We recognize that our work is only possible because of the multiple histories of resistance and contestation that intersect in Mexico, Peru, and Italy, including each and every one of you. Through our mission, we continuously acknowledge the voices of those who have been historically unheard, seeking to address the violence and injustices of settler colonialism and imperialism, knowing that envisioning justice is only possible in the anti-colonial way. This acknowledgement is not metaphorical, but rather an active engagement in which all of our artists in residence are included. It is the first step to honor the land, the wisdom to love and respect the people that inhabit Mexico, Peru, and Italy. And to begin with the presentation, I want to remind all of us with a few concepts. I want us to review again interdependency, and these are ideas based on Audre Lorde's thoughts, and it reads, without community, there is no liberation. Only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. Interdependency is the way to become free, which allows the I to be not in order to be used, but in order to be creative. This is a difference between the passive be and the active being, challenging the I, the notion of place, and even freedom. Within the interdependence of mutual non-dominant differences lies the security which enables us to descend into the chaos of knowledge and return with true visions of our future, along with the concomitant power to effect those changes which can bring the future into being. Elsa Barkley Brown reimagines, emphasizes that community isn't a fixed structure, but a continuous creation sustained by daily acts, friendship, friendship organizing, storytelling that weave Black life together, or all of our lives together. She writes that community is possible only when Gombo Yaya, everybody talks at once, rather than conventional consensus, is given full reign. Through this lens, community becomes a dynamic, multivocal process. It is created and recreated through interaction, through listening and responding, through recognizing that no life stands apart from the lives of others. Interdependency for Brown is not a matter of choice. It is a fabric of our social world. What matters is how we engage right with that fabric, whether we ignore its complexity or whether we embrace its multiple rhythms, allowing creativity, solidarity, and justice to emerge from the interplay of our differences. And then the practice as tactic. In the practice of everyday life, Michel de Certeau explains that strategies belong to powerful states, institutions, corporations, to the powerful. That establish structures, rules, and boundaries to organize space, time, and behavior. Strategies are planned from a position of authority. They are meant to define how life is ordered and who controls it. Tactics, on the other hand, are the art of the weak. This is in quotes. The improvised, often fleeting actions of those who lack institutional power, but still navigate, inhabit, and subtly alter the space imposed upon them. And even if we inhabit institutions or we collaborate or we have to deal with them, doesn't mean that we are not necessarily um, disenfranchised completely or that we are actually belonging to the structures. This is also why we have to think between the difference of tactic and strategy. Desertot writes that tactics are ingenious ways in which the oppressed make use of the space imposed upon them. They are acts of cunning and adaptation, operating within the cracks of dominant systems rather than trying to dismantle them outright. Tactics borrow from what already exists, using it differently, resignifying it, or making it serve others' needs than those intended by structures of power. It's one of the perfect examples is teaching. Art, understood as tactic, operates within existing systems, galleries, markets, urban environments, etc., while subtly bending their rules. It can thrive on ambiguity, improvisation, and ephemerality, refusing the permanence and totalizing vision of strategies. Tactics reminds us that resistance does not always look like grand revolutions. It can be small, everyday, clever disruptions that reclaim agency in space designed to control or exclude. They open up moments of freedom, however brief, in which other ways of being together and imagining the world can appear. And with this, I want to introduce the first artist. She will not be able to join us today, but I still want to honor her just briefly, and we'll wait for her presentation for the next session. Priscilla Dobler, she recently lost her dog, beloved daughter. So we sent her a big hug, and so we'll wait for the next session so that she can present. And we want to welcome then Casey Ramirez. Casey, would you like me to read or would you like to read it yourself?
Oh, I can read. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. My work explores the tension between stability and impermanence by placing architectural structures in consuming environments. In the wake of increasingly frequent severe storms and having direct experience with Superstorm Sandy, my personal sense of vulnerability connects with the impending tipping point of climate change. In my drawings and prints, buildings become a stand-in for human efforts for protection that are ultimately vulnerable to environmental extremes. I work primarily in printmaking and drawing. I'm attracted to the erosive properties of both etching and woodcut and how these materials resonate with my sense of decay or destruction. Most recently, I've begun to experiment with video projection, and there's something about the movement, however subtle, that seems to be necessary at this time.
And I included the two images that you sent us. This is the first one. If you can tell us a little bit about the image.
Yes, so the first image is kind of showing you the process of etching a plate. I'm applying this corrosive salt to bite into the surface of the metal to create an image. So it's sort of like simultaneously destructive and constructive in a way. And then the other image is of a drawing that is kind of in following with the same themes of a kind of human presence, architectural structure that shows its instability in a consuming environment.
And then this is a video projection.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. So this is like quite new for me, but there is something about um, frankly movement or something that is well, but it's also not moving because I think the ocean or the particularly the tide, it's something that even like a river is moving, but it's somehow kind of always the same. There's something that I'm really intrigued by about this notion. And there's that famous Heraclitus quote that one can never step into the same river twice, kind of thinking about that as well. But I don't know yet how this fits in with the sort of idea of destruction. So I'm still working through that.
Mhm.
And tell us a little bit more about the oceans, how you're thinking about climate change, how it is related to, it's a little bit, of course, describing the statement that you provided, but tell us a little bit more of the process. How do you arrive to these ideas?
Well, I think that I guess I'm interested in that like in betweenness or a sense of instability, vulnerability. Like I'm not showing you the moment after. I'm showing you the sort of perhaps ambiguous moment sort of during when a potential there could be a collapse or there could be a disintegration, but it hasn't happened yet. So I like that
Mhm.
idea of sort of like suspense
Mhm.
or but I guess also potential salvation in a way. Ooh, portentous. I like that word.
Now we can open the space for questions. What are questions that you have in terms of everyone else, in terms of technique, in terms of ideas, in terms of themes? Go for it. Comments, of course, as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've often been told like my work is haunting, and that's a good thing. I think that's what I'm going for. It is, yeah. I um the first image. I think actually that one not specifically. This is sort of a part of a series I've been working on with buildings and storms. So it isn't specifically referencing Sandy. The first artwork image, yeah, this is a drawing, so it's charcoal on like a gessoed panel, so
Mhm.
2D dry media. But I do mix water into the water and charcoal together, and sometimes gum arabic. So it's sort of like a pseudo watercolor.
Mhm.
Um, I don't actually. The question about video projection online, it's sort of because I'm very, what's the word, like sheepish about it. Like um, I'm not a video artist. Like I do, my work, my ability to edit and clip and make transitions and that sort of thing is like very provisional. Um, yeah, water. Yeah, I think there is something about like dust, water, fire. I mean, there's obviously been like tons of issues around forest fire, wildfires, across the U.S. and elsewhere, Canada. So that's kind of been a theme too, though that hasn't come out in the work so much.
I love the drawings, but I also love the idea of video because of your ability to comment on permanence and ephemerality, because the projection by its nature is really ephemeral. But then architecture, rooms, buildings, monuments have the illusion of being more permanent or fixed, or they're trying to fix
Mhm.
time. And
Right.
the projection is by its nature kind of fugitive, and not as fixed. And I don't know that it matters like right now. Like at one point we didn't know how to draw and we learned. So like the skills of editing are going to come. I don't know that, you know, when I looked at that projection, I was not thinking about, oh, the editing on this. I'm like, no, filling the room with water, filling an interior space with the exterior was really what I'm first struck by. So I don't know that the
Oh.
mythology necessarily resonates
Uh-huh.
with me as much as the idea resonates with me when I look at the work.
Oh, that's helpful.
What
You
was
putting
that?
it into those words is great.
What was that space that it was being projected in?
So it's actually the artist Elizabeth Murray's former painting studio. So it's got three walls. I hung a piece of fabric That was actually supposed to be my screen, but I sort of projected with, or experimented with distance. And when it started hitting those white walls, and then, you know, there was the plane change and it started to surround you. I got really intrigued by that.
I think something else that you could play around in terms with a projection is like Duralar, which is a frosted transparent
Mm,
paper,
hmm
Mylar transparent fabric, and then you could like project in the middle of a room and it becomes sort of even more
mm,
ghostly. Like we don't know like what is this on? How is this image floating in space? Um, you know, if you wanted it to just sort of be in the room or have a different image while being surrounded by water. The only thing I miss is your
hmm
like the drawing ability. Like I loved that drawing just because it was so masterful, like the etching or I know it looked like an etching, but you said it was a like a drawing. Um,
hmm
and I understand that sometimes as artists we go through a lot of work to acquire these skills and then we jettison them to make sure that the work continues to move forward. But uh it would be so nice to be able, like, can you do drawing and video together
Like,
or
that's occurred to me. That's not, um, yeah, I'd love to be able to animate my drawings
Mhm.
in order to do that. I think I'm at like a crossroads, a point where I, um, you know, I want to ask for help.
Mhm.
And I do have some colleagues who work in,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
time-based media that I could ask.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank
There's
you.
a comment by, yeah, thank you, and thank you for the wonderful questions. Stephanie's asking if Sandra, if you could share that info in the chat about the fabric, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna try to get some theatrical scrim, um, which is like, you know, used for special effects in theater, that can be projected on as well. Mm, good question, Stephanie. Um, well, that's the thing. Has it? And is it? Is it still standing? Is it damaged? Is it becoming yeah, becoming is it in the process of becoming, or is it disintegrating? I don't know. I mean, I source my imagery usually from construction sites, so they're buildings that are new, like
Mhm.
they have not yet been completed, and so I don't know that I have an answer for you there, but I guess it's that again that idea of tension that you know the building isn't like scraps or collapse into the ocean yet.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I often describe them as kind of skeletal. I like to think of them as like bones or bony. Thanks.
And you also use, while you were here in Puebla, you also use some images from chapels and churches, which also adds a different dimension in terms of what it's made or how it was made or what does it mean that it's being made in terms of destruction or in terms of being incomplete.
I wanted to ask
Mm,
a question or make a comment. Do you want to respond to that? Sorry, Kelsey.
I don't know that I have a good response for that yet. I'm just mulling it over because, yeah, I used an image from a chapel to work with in screen print, and I kind of injected some tumultuous water into it. But so I think I'm just sort of like punching through two things together at once just to see what they do. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say I wanted to raise the idea and ask a question about something that I see in all three images, including the process image, which is the element of water as transformation, and it sort of seems to be playing out in all three images in different ways. And it kind of relates also to what you were saying about the tension between, is the building falling apart or being reborn or something. It sort of relates to that, this element of changing and transformation. And I wonder if maybe, one, if that's something that you've thought about, and two, maybe that is something that can link all of these things together in some way. It's kind of interesting to think about, this process playing out on this plate for the etching itself as a way of making an image. The plate being sort of one of the same structures that you're investigating in all of these images.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Um, I feel like a lot of printmakers are it always occurs to me that I love seeing people's plates and that they are, they're in printmaking, they're often this just, the vehicle through which you make an image on paper. But I look at my plates a lot and I think they're um, objects unto themselves that hold a lot of meaning. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah, wonderful notes and wonderful questions. This is so enriching.
Absolutely, thank you.
There's another. I found interesting to think about the use of churches or chapels in your residency. Your drawings here is ambiguous, where the other one's also ambiguous. I wonder about the ambiguity of the structures.
Mm.
And then Janini's also said maybe a time-lapse video of etching process. And she's also saying, I thought the phrasing in your intro, that movement it's a necessity at this time, was interesting. A dual implication about necessity in your own process and also necessary in this moment of ecological change. Curious how these will show up in your work.
Mhm.
Well, I kind of like the ambiguity of the building. It kind of reminds me, and I'm forgetting the name of the architect, but he designed the Wexner Center, which is a center for art at Ohio State University.
OSU, yeah, I've been there.
And
Okay.
like the form of that building refers to like fortresses of the past, and then there's sort of like a modern section, and then there's that weird grid like that. And I think that architect does a lot of those grids on the outside of the building, but it does signify that like this building is continuing to grow, it's continuing to like continue to expand into the future, which is sort of really hopeful. Um, and so it's this idea of like, oh, the building is being built, and then there's a futility to that in the face of, like the nature, the storm that also kind of reminds me of like that painting by Turner, Hannibal crossing the Alps. The teeny weeny
Mm.
elephant, which seems like it's this massive, strong animal, but it doesn't matter because there's like this blizzard coming over the Alps. And so I kind of love that idea of, the tension between those two ideas. Peter Eisenman, thanks.
Oh, okay.
That for the life of me.
Mm.
Anyway, that was just sort of like
Thank you for that.
Jasmine is saying, I was wondering if you have seen any have seen any very earlier archival film footage that is highly corroded or degraded.
Ooh, I love early film, silent film, random scraps of, you know, clips that you can find on YouTube now. I love all of that texture. Um, yeah, thanks for that.
And also, I think you can think of drawing as an expansive medium. It doesn't necessarily have to be done with just a pencil, or so that you can, because it's really tracing. So from there, you can
Hmm.
trace with anything, or even time lapse, or even these techniques of deteriorating film with chemical processes. So there's different possibilities there as well.
I think that's a really good point, and it's occurred to me like because I also miss the drawn mark when
Mhm.
I'm, at looking at these, these video pieces that I'm just projecting onto these surfaces. And so I've been asking myself, like, what does it mean to draw this? To like, you know, it's a mimetic act. It's representing something else. Um, and does it need that? And I think my answer so far is like, oh, I think I'm not sure. I haven't resolved it, but I do think materials are the like X factor of, well, printmaking, there's so much that you can't control. And I feel like
Mhm. Mhm.
that I love that loss of control, that I don't know what it's going to look like when I pull the print. And so there's that element of like, that a mediation, that's something that I didn't necessarily touch. Yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and also you could even think of how you use chemistry, chemicals, anything on the walls that you're going to be projecting on, or the different possibilities of that.
Mm, mm, absolutely.
This is neither here nor there, but I think like because each of these different processes has their own history behind it. And I'm thinking of another friend of mine who uh traditionally she was a painter, but then she started doing this social practice work in a correctional facility. And, there was a theater element to it. So, these men would be speaking, and she would always have this linen background. And I said, what's up with that linen background? She's like, it's
Mm.
history of painting is that linen that would be painted like, and that's how she was sort of drawing that into video by like what speakers were set against or what you could project on. I know it's not the same as like the actual drawing, but it's a way of merging histories, I guess.
Well, yeah,
Oh, definitely.
and that's a very interesting point because you can even think of how these techniques historically have been used in making for the expansion of ideas that were actually painted, for instance, in convents, in many of the religious paintings that you find in convents all over the Americas were actually based on prints. But also you can think of how historically drawing is a technique that was allowed for women because it was not dangerous. It was ladylike. So you have all these layers that you could play with as well.
Interesting. Do you have any reading about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll send you some. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I'll put them in the collective
Okay.
classroom so that everyone has access to them.
Mm,
Thank you, Casey, for this wonderful sharing and all the amazing questions. Um,
thank
we're
you.
going to move on to the next one. Hmm? Agatha, are you in the room? So
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone.
would you like to start
Um,
reading? Hello.
yeah, hi. I guess I can read.
Mhm.
I'm very happy to share with you. I just want to say I'm still very much in exploration. Um, Also, English is not my first language, so if you don't understand, just tell me. So, yes, I am currently exploring with the guidance of Francisco the pragmatic meaning of intuition, rhythms, and layering. I am inspired by the way women in history created links, connection, community, like witches. So I have some readings about witches. So that was their power. They knew what rhythm and movement to adopt to have power. So I'm now exploring how I can create a cohesion in my practice, even with maybe heterogenic things, connection between things I create and my space. I aspire to create an installation, an atmosphere in a space. So I work a lot with the idea of mood and atmosphere. I work with palette knife, fabric in my hands to put colors on canvas. It's acrylic. I'm a painter. Also sometimes the shower, the water from the shower. I put my canvas in. Well, I don't use paint brushes. I don't know why. So I started to free myself from mounted canvas on wood and rather work on what I call floating canvases. I use different rhythms in my movement to paint and create abstractions. I work chromatic accumulation stains on many, many, many layers. So there's like different arbitrary bumps. So a texture appears with the quantity of paint on the different layers, and a part of the creation is arbitrary, like I said, because of the asperities of the other layers. Um, I find joy in choosing each color for each layer, and I link myths and together. And I would like to explore more the symbols of. Um, well, it moved a lot in my head. Well, I was a lot interested to mermaids, witches, and other feminine creatures, but this is not I wrote, not necessarily in a figurative way. Their ambiguity and strength through femininity, with various symbolism and interpretations, are catching my attention. Um, I was before working on large scales, like big canvases. I still want to do that, but also I started a series of small floating canvases that breathe more in their composition, something about a current in the movement, and my way of creating in a fluid and continuous temporality, like a series. I like the idea of series. I like to combine them like a mosaic and change the configuration freely. I stopped a little bit for that part. I will come back. I'll explain maybe more. So they are placed on my kitchen table like a tablecloth. I also put some pointillism work, so with different rhythm and types of movements. So those works I do put in my windows, like curtains. Some other large scales are on my floor, like carpets, and I play with my space, with my apartment a lot. So I literally sometimes I just step on what I do. So there's words like light texture, also not only colors. And I want to add a layer of voids to let light pass through like lace. So also I will work making holes in my canvases, on my floating canvases. Another exploration is the transformation of 2D canvas to 3D canvas. So like origami, not exactly like origami, but I will fold the canvas. It's another layer in the process, and I will create some kind of objects that look like flowers. So I sent new images. I don't know if they're there, but
I'll
it's
share them.
moving quite quickly in the last weeks in my head. Also, maybe if I have time, I can just start to explain, if there's a little bit more time.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Or okay, so it's how if I start from the beginning.
Uh-huh.
I was very much attached to the idea of myth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so this is also linked to my studies in the academic world, and I was not really happy in this world. So now I'm not in university anymore. But a lot of the ideas, like paradoxically, a lot of the ideas come from the academic world. But I tend to try to be to function in another way compared to how I function at school, and so myth, because I made ancient studies for one thing. I studied ancient studies, and before in antiquity, or we can say there was two maybe in the Western world, major way of thinking was logos and mythos. And logos was more about rationality and truth, and mythos was more about, you know, myths. It was linked to something that is not true, but it was more about, you know, there's different versions of myths. It's more vague, but it was also very, very important as a way of thinking. And it was, myths were taught at school and for children, and there was a lot of symbolics and things we know important about myths. And with the century of enlightenment, rationality went up, and so it's like logos went up and mythos went down. And after, there were different philosophers like Nietzsche and others that wanted to give again value to myth and mythos. And that's a bit what I try to do, because also in history, mythos, myths, and, you know, vague, spontaneous, also mistakes and emotions, and all of this is a lot linked to women historically.
Yep.
This is another subject, but this is something I tend to try to do in my life, is to say that the, you know, the lexical, everything, all the things linked to myths or mythos, mythos in Greek is okay. You know, all this can also be good in you know, capitalistic performing, like to perform world. I don't know. Sorry for my English, if I can be
No, it's
understood.
good. It is easy to understand.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So what I try to do is, you know, all about the power of those women, like witches, for example, was a lot about how they, it was an everyday life, you know. So I try to make art being very, very close to my everyday life, how I use things. I also really love the concept of objects. So for example, my canvases that were mounted on wood, I started to paint the depth also, like the around, not around, but like
The sides.
the depth of
Yeah.
the
The
spirit.
sides.
Yeah, the sides. So they began to look more like objects and not just a surface painted. And then from that, I wanted to, there's not pictures of my framed of my wooden canvases, but what I try to do is that now I try to free myself from that rectangle and that wooden frame, to work on floated canvases that, like I said, I will make holes in them and fold also. So it's really about also ornamentation and decoration. So I create objects that, well, intuitively they look a bit like flowers, but this is important for me to try to free myself from this square and this wood frame. So it's not necessarily. Sometimes I feel like my practice, my explorations are maybe superficial, but for me it's not, because it's how I want my life to be around all those ideas that in history were linked to different women. So I don't know if this is clear. I don't know where I'm going right now, really. So this is what I will say for now. Yeah.
I think the idea.
No, well, what you're is use the.
Do you hear? I don't. For me, it's.
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit, Francisco.
We. Oh, go ahead. If
I don't hear.
go ahead.
I didn't hear what just was said. Are you hearing?
Se está cortando tu audio, Paco.
Yeah. So I'm not the only one who didn't.
Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't hear either. I was just going to say I love the idea of, cutting through the canvas, and creating that liminal layer, because a lot of times when we're talking about this idea of myth and images, like mermaids are hybrids, right? So they are in a
Mhm.
liminal, they occupy a liminal area. Um, I also think like that idea of rationality and truth during the Renaissance, that idea of Renaissance rationality and truth is kind of funny to me. Um,
Well, it was, yeah.
so,
I meant in the antiquity, like the etymology of the world, of the word.
yeah, okay.
But
Because I also think about that time period and its relationship to witches, again, um, referring to women as liminal and more subject to corruption and sin is sort of
mhm.
embodied in that idea. And so by physically cutting the canvas and playing with light in a different way, I really think you are referring to this idea of liminal. It's something that's in between when
Mhm.
you're using light, which is again something that's it's more ephemeral. So I
Yeah, thank sorry.
I'm looking for the questions, like the last slide had all of these questions.
Sorry, what? Can you repeat? Questions of?
Yeah, well, I wasn't able to copy down all of the questions. You had questions about how
Ah, yeah,
the
yeah, okay.
3D canvas, how does light behave, with the overall. Okay, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the it's like witches and mermaids will animate me, but they will. This is not what I uh produce. It's just like how how it
Oh,
yeah, well, like you said about liminality and themes, different themes like that. And I think what I try to do, yes, is to change, like create a movement between um, what we can. Sorry, the word is missing me. Well, we're waiting from something from a painting, but then I'm changing what is a painting, and it becomes
Mhm.
something that is different. And also, there's this idea of it's very sometimes scary to make a piece and after just cut it and fold it. So there's this idea of not violence, but like it's very like vertiginous to do that. So in all of this process, I kind of feel linked to different um, myths and women in history, but I don't necessarily know exactly why right now. But I'm exploring, and that's my it's really not in a finished state.
It's wonderful. Can you guys hear me again?
Yes.
Good. Yes. What I was going to say is that I think what you are doing is really interesting in multiple layers. It's what we in the residency call non-dominant forms of knowledge, how myths seem to be myth, but they can produce technologies and ideas that are competing with dominant knowledge. One
Mm-hmm.
of the ideas that Luz Irigaray um, analyzes is that, and I think I mentioned this before, we have been put and fixed in a society that believes in photology as if light can give truth. And
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing is the opposite. It's like, as Sandra was mentioning, breaking the tyranny of painting, because if you think about it, it's a masculine medium historically, not that it needs to be. It's also the most imperial medium that exists. This is also why in auctions of, master whatever artists, painting is frequently the most expensive one, but it's also fabric. So you're seeing through the medium that historically shows the labor behind it, because not necessarily men were actually weaving the fabric. So all these layers that you reveal in the process are really interesting. And I think it's really clever to think about these, as Sandra was mentioning as well, liminal spaces, not based on form, but actually based on what they historically can allow to exist, which is a tactic. It's not about wanting to make the shape of a mermaid, but what does a mermaid can do through these ideas of not really being a woman, not really being an animal, not really being
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that challenges notions of certainty and reality and science, etc.
Yeah, it's like I had something like that in my head, but you just said it beautifully. So
Well, because
thank
I've
you.
been working with you, so I know part of the process. So yes, I'm
Yeah,
helping. Other
thank you.
questions? Casey's asking, the canvas becomes more, or she's saying he's become more like a membrane with those cuts, holes.
Uh, looks like membrane with yeah. It's like as if the state or the identity or the essence of the canvas will change. So it's not just a surface on which you will paint, but also it's a way of telling something about, exactly how you said with what is a mermaid, what is a witch, what is, in a largely historic point of view. It's used in another way of just being a surface, a canvas.
I think this photo that you sent as well, that you are showing the canvas, holding it to the window. Maybe you could also try light behind the canvas,
Yeah.
different ways of illuminating. Go
Yeah, that's what something I really want to try different things, and also the kind of big flowers. I don't know really why it went with flowers, but that's something like creating something like a garden, or just also intuitively like some when you hang something from the ceiling with light. I don't know what's the word in English, like a lamp, but from the ceiling. I also want to try these big flowers folded, but with the holes. I don't want to set my place on fire, but I will try,
ahead. You have
different
to.
things about how it can be used also like a decorative, because I also really was interested in ornamentation and decoration, and when I studied medieval manuscripts. um, and this is also something that for me, beauty, even if it's like subjective, of course, and like decoration, ornamentation, it has a value in itself, and it's something that for me is not superficial, and it's there for as an essence of being, yeah.
Well, yeah, and you can also connect it to the notion of plants being used by empire. Think about the myth of the
Notion of
garden.
plants, what you said.
Plants and Empire. There's a book, and I'll send it to you, Plants and
Okay,
Empire.
okay.
And it's how we accepted, this is the consequence of that, but the myth of the garden and how we destroy that. It's how we cut our ties to other species, is how we accept becoming human.
Yeah,
So the myth of the garden is relegated to the betray of women. Think about Eve and
yeah.
how she betrays the world by accepting whatever it is. So, you can link it to, and also the myths of gardens going into, different directions and people moving, all the way to even mythical gardens of Greece or Rome or,
Yeah,
um,
historism, yeah.
right, and
I have
even,
a piece that is titled like that. Yeah.
right, yep. So you can use that to also, because it becomes a garden as an extension of which we coexist. So think about how these narratives tells, um, myths are not really myths. They just tell the story that doesn't want to be told in the way that it was actually happening, meaning destruction. So
Mm.
you can think of other ways of looking at these narratives. Our internet might be iffy at some point because there will be I don't know if it's a rehearsal how we say it, but it's a simulacra of the earthquake in Mexico in September 19th was the earthquake. So every year we do the simulacra and they cut off electricity, blah, 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 blah. It's until noon, but it might be the case that it happens before. So just letting you know. Okay, so we have
And I have
time.
the question here that is very
Go ahead.
interesting. Me too. Is the from Jasmine is all those little pieces of canvas in the bowl. Yes, it's also something that I want to use, and that I don't know how exactly now, but I keep them with me, like some kind of a weird treasure, and I will decide what I do with that, because also there's this idea of like a constellation of different souls that were working. You know, they had a big power, those women, those witches, and they were the core of community or something like that for me. But I have to read more about that, of course. But it's all this kind of beauty everywhere. So yeah, it's this is important for me. Those little pieces of fabric. Yeah.
Yeah, you could think of them as seeds, even.
So to see, sorry.
You could even think of them as seeds from the flowers that you're making.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy that you're saying that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we have time for one more presentation. Thank you, Agatha. It was wonderful. Absolutely
Thank you.
wonderful. Yep. And let me go up here. So, Samar. Now we know for her.
Be me today. Okay.
Yes. What time is it for you?
It's 9 p.m.
Oh, okay. Not bad.
You're
Okay.
still awake.
Yes.
Of course, I'm awake. You're lucky I'm not drinking wine while then I
I don't know if that's lucky or
my
not.
last
But go ahead.
presentation, I would have been a lot more chatty.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll read it and then I'll elaborate. Hi, everyone. I'm Samar. So my practice explores the instability of perception and the fragmentary nature of meaning making through a material and conceptual investigation of pattern, repetition, and distortion. Rooted in Palestinian embroidery and other craft traditions, my work resists fixed narratives and instead embraces processes of abstraction, concealment, and reconfiguration. Through textile, sculpture, printmaking, and installations, I examine how visual and cultural codes, often inherited, gendered, or politicized, can be dismantled and reformed into spaces of inquiry and multiplicity. My recent work engages with the metaphor of shadow as a site of ambiguity, a transformation where light and obscurity become tools for questioning what is seen, unseen, known, and believed. At the core of my practice is a meditation on the constant transformation of reality, how meaning, identity, and perception are never static but always in flux. Across my projects, I seek to reimagine the thresholds between knowing and unknowing, visibility and erasure. My practice is both a form of inquiry and a means of unmaking, an attempt to unravel internalized structures and offer alternative ways of seeing and understanding. Sorry if I read that too fast. So when I sent the images, I had started working with plexi, but with acrylic, but my main practice, well, no, I mean, I'm very textile based, and a lot of the work comes from motifs found in traditional Palestinian embroidery. So I embroider, I take things apart, and then that kind of goes into printmaking, but printmaking textiles or etchings, but from a textile embossing. So I like using the language of Palestinian embroidery because it is a language. So anyway, so for these images, I started melting acrylic sheets, and then I built this weird press thing, and I would put an embroidery piece underneath and then put the heated acrylic and then put it under and then emboss, like push it, get the embossing of the embroidery. And my goal was to have the embroidery or the pattern be embossed so slightly that that you can't see it actually on the acrylic. You can see it only in the shadows. And so it's this whole idea of questioning what is seen, what is unseen, what you choose to see, what is chosen for you to see, and then meaning making through that process, and then how, yeah, I don't have an ending for that sentence. Yeah, and then, okay, so this is my main, this is what I've been doing more often. Basically, I take my embroidery pieces that are hand embroidered, and then I take them apart, and then I put them back together in a way to kind of redefine it. So I like working with embroidery, the Palestinian embroidery, because it's very strict. And also people assume that, you know, it needs to look a certain way, it needs to be tidy, motifs look a certain way. So it was my way of finding a way to like redefine and still have the thing that I'm creating challenge the notion of like feeling whole or being an object or being an artwork or being whatever. So it's like me trying to engage with the work, taking it apart and putting it back together is like me redefining all the definitions that were given to us, you know? I don't know if I'm making sense. Now I'm just rambling. And then I started embroidering without fabric at all. So for me, initially, that was a metaphor for when I was thinking about Palestinian identity and how it continues to exist without a land. A lot of us are in, you know, diasporas. And so I started using the fabric as a metaphor for land, and the embroidery and the threads are kind of like the people. And so I was trying to challenge the material and see if the threads will hold together without the land as the foundation, the fabric as the foundation. Does that make sense?
It does, yep. How do you arrive to printmaking?
So printmaking was another, so in embroidery, there's a lot of repetition. So I liked, I wanted to explore the idea of a thing being the same but different. So, you know, you take a textile piece and then you make a print, and then it looks so much like the textile. Is it a textile or is it a print? So it's this challenging the notion of sameness and difference. And then also it challenges, you know, the viewer or myself, you know, it challenges, how do I say this? The ability to like define something, you know? So even when I'm working with a lot of my work, I work with light and shadow. So the light will go through these pieces that have no fabric and cast shadows, and then it challenges these started as installations that hung from the ceiling. So all the motifs would hang from the ceiling, and then there was light, and then they would cast these shadows. So actually this artwork made me learn more about identity or identification than I thought I knew, because it showed me that actually the threads don't just hold themselves without land. So the culture doesn't just hold itself together because without the land, but it also exists in this multi-dimensional way. So it also exists in the shadows, and it also exists through perception and perspective, because when you move, they move, the pieces move, and then everything is just constantly shifting.
There's two questions. Epi's asking, how does it feel when you start deconstructing, in question mark, your work? And then also, Samara, I also work with embroidery.
Ariana.
Oh, Ariana, yeah, that's true. But looking British / American traditions, your work is very interesting, especially the dismantled embroidery, and then Epi adds, I thought it was burned looking at it at a glance.
Okay, I don't know where this is, but anyway,
How does it feel when
so
you illustrate?
well, I see it now.
Mhm.
When I start when I start deconstructing, at first it was like a little stressful, but it's more of this like rebellious act for me. It's like this a liberating, little rebellion. So
And you're known for that?
I don't know. You
Yeah,
tell me.
I do. Yeah,
I don't experience me, you experience me.
that's true.
Um, yeah, so it doesn't hurt my heart as much as one would think to take them apart.
And then if you could drive us through the process of the shadow to arriving to these pieces of in plexiglass.
Okay, so the shadow. Okay, I'm not sure how to answer this, but for me, the most interesting part of the work ended up becoming the shadows because it expanded the work, and then it was almost like it went beyond the boundaried space. So if you choose to look at the textile work, you decide, you have to kind of decide, does the work end at the material, or does the work end at the shadows? And so now you have to question how what you see or what you engage with or what you acknowledge as something existing, and what you don't. So that's why shadows and light are important for my work, because it just makes me or whoever more aware of how much we like to structure our meaning making process, and how
Yeah.
it actually doesn't, it's not structured at all, like you decide kind of thing. So when I started melting the plexi and then getting the light embossing, and then getting it in the shadows and not on the acrylic, it kind of it made that concept even more real. So it's almost like these like layers of meaning making or choice in meaning making or truths being invisible because we choose for them to be invisible, or visible because we choose to make them visible. So does that make sense?
It does. It's what Nicholas Mirsov describes with the idea of the screen. When you break this, remember that screens, images
Mhm.
become screens because they get flattened, and we organize them in categories. This is an embroidery, this is a print, this is a painting. When you break those boundaries, you make the viewer aware that they are in the presence of a screen where they have to decide where to stand. Is it that you're engaging with the feeling of the screen, or is it gonna be a process where you go beyond the screen?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Um,
Matt wrote, you might already know him, but wanted to mention Jordan Nassar is another artist working with Palestinian embroidery in a reinvented way.
Yeah, yes, I know him. He's very popular here. He's a great art. I mean, he's a good artist.
And then Casey says, bingo, the invisibility idea, the thing itself is invisible, but its form redirects light into a seen form.
Yeah, light and perception. So it's almost like nothing is actually invisible. You're just choosing to make it invisible.
Absolutely. Yep.
So
I want to make a quick note about that. The plexi and the projection idea too. It sort of allows for the idea of movement and change. Like the piece could move and the shadows can shift, and I think that's maybe kind of cool because it's contrast between the embroidery itself is like a very fixed sort of permanent flat thing, sort of, and this allows for it to take on a different quality.
Yeah, totally. They're actually the image, I don't know how to tell you, the one of the sculpture looking thing. No, in the last slide. Anyway, it was a proposal that I sent for an outdoor sculpture, and the 2 sheets of acrylic on the sides have the embossing, and the sculpture was going to be outside, so I had it placed on the axes of like the sun rotation. So, and then also the acrylic was like folded, and then that middle part was supposed to be some sort of form built with, I don't know what material, but white. And so it was playing with the movement of the sun, and then the idea that the shadows are constantly moving across the sculpture. And so it never has a fixed view. Like it doesn't have a fixed, I don't know, view. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Yeah, so I was using that idea that you were talking about.
Right, you're challenging the 1-point perspective.
Yeah. And then also the way that the shadows would cast on this bendy wall would also affect the architecture of that wall thing. So even the way the shadows and light would play on it would also kind of distort the material form depending on the time of the day. So it's kind of cool. I didn't get the proposal, but here we are.
Well, thanks for sharing, because that's also wonderful. Other questions, other comments? Jasmine is saying, I noticed the use of pins in the embroidery piece. These impermanent stabilization aids demarcate a border. I was wondering if this is a product of your process, or is there additional meaning to these neither finished nor completely unstable edges?
The pins in the images that were shown were just part of the process. But I do use like sewing pins when I'm done to pin it onto the board that I'm using. So there is this element of like rebellion, or we can call it carelessness, but rebellion. There's a voice in my head calling it carelessness, but it's not. It's a choice. But yeah, that's the ones you saw are process.
I don't know why Stephanie can't see the images, but we're recording the session, so it'll be available. And also, we want to encourage all of you to post your website on the collective classroom so that everyone can also see the work. And then Agatha says, I'm always impressed with everything I hear in this presentation. Me too. Actually, it's really wonderful to see the process from inside. So yes.
Cool. I didn't realize I could have just read this text instead of talking.
Well, you started talking and we didn't want to interrupt you. So.
I know. I figured you're like, let her go.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, because this is related to the I wouldn't say origin, but working with embroidery from the beginning, how you arrived to the residency, but how you're addressing gendered ideas is very different. So I wonder if you could explain a little bit more of the choices in the types of embroidery that you have, specifically how you think of these ideas in terms of nationalism, because gender is about nationalism, etc.
That's a good question. Can you ask me in a different way?
In the statement that you read, you also, through text,
so
go ahead.
got it. So basically, Palestinian embroidery, like all embroidery, is considered a woman's craft, and generally it's the also it's a classist. It's supposed to be villagers who have time to embroider, but city people don't because they're busy in the patriarchy. So I still don't really know how to, but I think that what my work does, it dismantles the whole gendered idea of embroidery, not just because I'm a woman, but I don't know how to answer your question, Paco.
Well, I think what I find fascinating is that, and fascinating is the wrong word. Really powerful is the process of destroying it, because it's not only the labor
Oh.
that goes into it, of course, which is what you've described in terms of gender and class, sitting down and being feminine while you're embroidering, whatever that means, but also then pulling it apart and then expanding the notion of gender into space. So, for instance, when 'cause I was really taken by what you've described in terms of the shadow. Um, and this is related to the question that Stephanie's asking as well. Gender is about nationalism, yes, because it's the transition between colonialism and imperialism from the 18th century to the 19th century. And it's a new way of spatializing and distributing power unevenly. So when you expand this to even make the embroidery invisible, but gendered space is visible through the shadows, it's really wonderful. It's how we have to navigate these spaces. And it's also the tension between the visible and the invisible. Race doesn't really exist, but we experience the effects of that, same as gender, same as class. So that shadow is really, really interesting. Yep.
So what I was, when I started doing the Palestinian embroidery in Jordan, what I was most fascinated by was the environment that was created to embroider. So the sassiness, obviously, but also the strict methodology. There's a way you have to do it. There's you have to tuck your stitches. You can't have threads coming apart. We have lots of stories about how, if women wanted to get married back in the day, the potential mother-in-law would check the back of the Palestinian dress. And if it's organized, then, and you have a small nose and small lips, you can get married. And if it's not organized, you're probably not going to keep a nice house, kind of thing. So, and then also that environment of strictness and rigidity, I realized was a form of, first of all, bringing in this like patriarchal way of behaving, which is more masculine because it gave it more value. And then also in their minds. And then also it was a form of preservation. So it was like, you have to do it this way and we cannot change because then we will disappear. And then this, so my way of like cutting and pulling apart, yes, it was a rebellious act, but also it was me being like, I can continue to exist and this can continue to exist and Palestinians can continue to exist even when the practice evolves. Even if this, even if it's not defined in that way from that time in this context, So it was the environment that was created to embroider Palestinian embroidery is how the work came out. It wasn't really about like my deep passion for embroidery. I mean, Francisco, you remember, I was like, I don't even know how to thread a needle. I'm never going to finish these classes because I can't get the thread in the needle. So yeah, I think that answers your question a little.
Absolutely. And I don't know if I ever sent you the essay by Ursa Barkley Brown that I actually quoted in this presentation, because she actually talks about, I'll send it to you. It's titled What Has Happened Here. And it actually talks about how it begins with a story or some sort of a anecdote on a quilt and how it's being criticized because the quilt has the threads out in the same way that you've described. And as the reading moves along, then it arrives to rhythm to understand asymmetrical rhythms, which is also visible in the process of how you're pulling these threads apart, to understand space and time as a means of ethical questions, survival, resistance, etc., etc. So I'll send it to you.
Thanks. Yeah.
I will post all these essays on the collective classroom. You know, you're taking notes, so I remember, 'cause sometimes I forget, so I'll post them there for everyone of you. Any other questions? Any other comments? We're reaching the end of the session. Well, thank you so much. It's really inspiring, I have to say that. I think for the last session, I will also share some of the work that I've been doing with you guys in the exhibition. I have prepared a lecture to try to ground method, you know, in terms of method, but less abstract and more concrete. So I'll do that for you guys. And it's always a pleasure. So we'll post these recording. I'll edit it so that the missing part will be all together. And we will see you in the next session. And I will also post the readings in the classroom so that you have access to it. Make sure to please post your website so that each one of you has contact information, has seen the work. And let's try to stay in touch as much as possible. We always encourage interactions. And yes, like Casey's saying, with much gratitude for this wonderful space. I love these sessions. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next session in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Gracias, adiós.
Thanks.